The morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was crisp, with sunlight glinting off the tarmac. Flight 237, bound for Washington, D.C., sat quietly at Gate 12, waiting for its final boarding call. Passengers shuffled along the jet bridge, dragging carry-ons, chattering about meetings, vacations, or the monotony of routine travel. Among them, almost invisible to the bustling crowd, was a girl no older than 13. She walked with quiet precision, a small backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes hidden beneath a dark cap pulled low. Emily Carter, as she was known on paper, looked like any other unaccompanied minor. Yet beneath her unassuming exterior beat the heart of someone trained to notice, analyze, and act, someone far beyond her years. As she passed the gate agents, they gave polite smiles, assuming she was traveling alone, but otherwise harmless. A small piece of laminated paper clutched in her hand contained her boarding pass, but also an encrypted code only she could read, a subtle identifier for those who might recognize her secret. The airline staff didn't notice. They rarely did. Emily moved forward, threading through the crowd. Heading straight for row 9, seat B, she avoided eye contact, didn't speak to anyone, and kept her pace measured, like someone who had done this countless times before, though in truth, this flight was different. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain James Rourke ran his pre-flight checks with military precision. A veteran of the Air Force, Rourke's years of experience had taught him that even the smallest anomaly could be a sign of disaster. The hum of the engines, the gentle clatter of the boarding process, and the faint smell of jet fuel were familiar comforts. He glanced over at his first officer, a young but capable pilot named Liam Stanton, and nodded. "Everything looks clean. Weather's perfect. Fuel checks complete," Rourke said in his calm, authoritative tone. Yet even as he spoke, a small unease tugged at him, a shadow of instinct he couldn't explain. Pilots, he knew, often felt things before instruments could detect them. Back in the cabin, Emily slid into her seat, fastening her seatbelt with care. She placed her backpack at her feet, checking its contents surreptitiously. A compact tablet, a portable encryption rig, and a small metallic chip embedded beneath the lining. To any casual observer, it was just a child securing her belongings. To those who knew, it was a toolkit capable of overriding systems most adults couldn't comprehend. She opened a small notebook and scribbled something in coded symbols, erasing it quickly before a flight attendant passed by. The passengers around her were a mix of business travelers and vacationers. A man in a pinstripe suit adjusted his tie. A couple whispered nervously about delays, and a mother tried to soothe her fussy toddler. Emily's presence barely registered, except for the occasional glance from an older woman who noticed the intensity of her stare. The girl seemed different, observant, alert. She wasn't fidgeting, she wasn't distracted, and she certainly wasn't the average unaccompanied minor. As the last passengers settled, the flight attendants began their safety demonstrations. The familiar motions of seatbelts, oxygen masks, and emergency exits filling the cabin with routine energy. Emily followed along with practiced precision, not because she needed to learn, but because she understood that appearances mattered. Every action she took could be scrutinized by anyone who might recognize her for who she truly was, a prodigy, trained for a purpose most would never guess. Captain Rourke's voice came over the intercom, steady and calm, giving the usual welcome and safety instructions. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight today, with clear skies all the way to Washington, D.C. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." The standard announcement brought a ripple of murmurs and polite nods from the passengers. Only Emily remained motionless, her eyes scanning the cabin, assessing each person with an almost imperceptible frown. Then, Just as the aircraft doors were closed and the jet began taxiing to the runway, a faint irregularity caught Rourke's attention. On the small radar panel, a signal blinked briefly, an anomaly too subtle to be immediately alarming. He frowned, leaning forward. He muttered. Strange blip. He dismissed it for the moment, attributing it to minor traffic interference. But instinct, honed by decades of experience, told him to keep it in mind. There was always a reason for a blip. Always. Outside, the engines roared to life, and Flight 237 began its steady ascent. Passengers murmured as the city shrank below, unaware of the tension silently weaving through the cabin. Emily's gaze drifted toward the cockpit door. She could sense it already, the pulse of danger in the air, invisible yet undeniable. Her fingers flexed subtly over the controls hidden within her backpack. Every muscle in her body was tuned to the coming storm, even if no one around her knew it yet. Flight attendants moved down the aisle, distributing coffee and snacks, chatting cheerfully with passengers. Emily took none of it, her focus unbroken. A young boy in the row ahead tried to peek at her notebook. She glanced up, and he froze under her intense gaze, realizing she wasn't someone to be trifled with. She returned her attention to the flight, to the hum of machinery, to the subtle vibrations of a plane in motion. Cues only someone trained like her would notice. Captain Rourke, scanning the instruments, checked altitude, speed, and engine performance. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. The quiet alertness of the cabin, the gentle sway of the plane, the distant chatter, all of it would soon be shattered. Emily, in row 9, leaned back slightly, a tiny, almost invisible smile touching her lips. She had been waiting for this moment, though no one on the plane suspected it. In the heart of an ordinary flight, a child sat quietly, carrying the weight of a secret that could save lives or endanger them all. And somewhere, beyond the cabin walls and beyond the clouds, unseen forces were already in motion, ready to test the courage and skill of everyone on board. As Flight 237 leveled off at 32,000 feet, the cabin settled into the predictable hum of midder travel. Passengers relaxed, some closing their eyes, others scrolling through phones or reading magazines. The faint scent of coffee mixed with the sterile smell of recycled air, a familiar comfort to seasoned travelers. But amid the mundane rhythm, not everything was as ordinary as it seemed. Emily Carter, in row 9, remained alert. Her hands rested lightly on her backpack, her fingers subconsciously tracing the contours of the metallic chip embedded inside. Her eyes flicked repeatedly toward the cockpit door. Something was off. She noticed subtle vibrations in the fuselage, too rhythmic to be turbulence, too precise to be natural. The autopilot, she observed, was responding with an almost imperceptible lag. She inhaled slowly, calming herself, analyzing patterns, testing her intuition. She knew what it meant. Someone was probing the flight systems. It wasn't a mechanical fault. It wasn't a software glitch. It was a deliberate interference, a digital intrusion. A man in seat 17A, wearing a dark jacket and sunglasses despite the cabin lighting, began fidgeting nervously. He tapped his earpiece, murmuring inaudible words, glancing repeatedly at the instruments on the overhead panel. Emily's gaze narrowed. She recognized the subtle signs of someone trained to manipulate, to interfere. She shifted slightly in her seat, preparing for action, yet carefully maintaining the guise of an ordinary passenger. Meanwhile, Captain Rourke sat in the cockpit, scanning the standard indicators. Engine performance was steady, instruments normal. But then, a soft, irregular beep emanated from the communications console, faint, almost hidden beneath the low hum of the aircraft. He frowned. "Liam, did you see that?" he whispered to the first officer. Stanton leaned forward, squinting at the digital readouts. "Probably interference from the other traffic," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Rourke's instincts, however, screamed at him. He had spent decades reading situations, sensing danger before it fully materialized. The blip returned, brief, sharp, and intentional. Someone was trying to communicate with the aircraft systems, but it wasn't standard air traffic control. The captain's jaw tightened. "Lock it down," he murmured. Stanton began toggling the comms channels, attempting to trace the source, but the signal was clever, almost ghost-like in its elusiveness. Back in row 9, Emily's fingers moved across her backpack's controls. She whispered an encryption code under her breath, activating a small detection program within her rig. The device buzzed softly, identifying multiple unauthorized access attempts. She exhaled slowly. It was worse than she thought. The intrusion wasn't random. It was coordinated, deliberate, and skilled. Whoever was doing this knew the plane's systems intimately, and they weren't merely trying to cause disruption. Their intent was far more sinister. The passengers remained oblivious. A young couple argued softly about whether to get a taxi or an Uber once they landed. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop, unaware that the device he trusted might be compromised. The flight attendants continued their rounds, smiling politely, offering beverages, and reminding passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened. But in the cabin, Emily's aura of alertness contrasted sharply with the naive calm of the rest of the passengers. She alone could perceive the threat looming, just beyond their awareness. Suddenly, a series of minor malfunctions began cascading through the plane. The overhead lights flickered briefly. A subtle vibration shuddered along the fuselage. Emily's heart rate quickened, but she remained composed. She began logging the anomalies into her tablet, running real-time analysis against patterns she had memorized in years of training. Every second mattered. The difference between being a mere passenger and a potential lifesaver hung on her ability to stay calm and act decisively. Captain Rourke felt it too. He noticed the subtle lag in the autopilot's responses, slight deviations in altitude that shouldn't have been there. The plane seemed twitchy, as though it had a mind of its own. "That's not normal," he muttered, adjusting the yoke with a careful hand. His eyes darted toward the radar, scanning for any irregularities. Nothing appeared overtly wrong, yet his instincts screamed that something was very wrong. In seat 17A, the man shifted again, murmuring into his earpiece. Emily observed him carefully, recognizing patterns she had studied extensively in prior training exercises. Subtle hand movements, micro-expressions, and a constant scanning of the environment. He was initiating some form of control sequence. She didn't yet know the full scope of his plan, but she could feel its malevolence, precise and targeted. A subtle vibration ran through the plane again. The autopilot hesitated, then corrected with a slight overcompensation. Rourke frowned, gripping the yoke tighter. He exchanged a look with Stanton, who nodded grimly. Something was tampering with the flight systems. The thought that passengers were unaware of the danger made Rourke's stomach tighten. It was no ordinary threat. Someone had intimate knowledge of aviation protocols, communication systems, and security bypasses. Emily's mind raced. She had trained for scenarios like this, though never in real life. Simulations had taught her the signs of a digital hijack, but no practice could fully prepare her for the weight of reality. A plane with 176 souls at risk, and a clock ticking invisibly toward disaster. She whispered another line of code, activating an internal firewall that interfaced subtly with the aircraft systems, buying precious minutes while she analyzed the intrusion. The tension in the cabin was subtle but growing. Passengers began murmuring nervously at minor turbulence, unaware that their environment had become a digital battlefield. The man in 17A continued to work surreptitiously, his eyes darting between Emily and the cockpit. Every move was calculated. He hadn't noticed that she was already aware of his presence, that she had identified him as the source of the anomaly. Captain Rourke's voice cut through the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some minor turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." His voice masked the internal tension perfectly, a captain's skill at projecting calm while assessing danger. Emily's eyes flicked to the cockpit door, knowing that soon it would no longer be enough to observe. Action would be required, and she alone was equipped to respond. Minutes passed with increasing subtlety. The autopilot's responses lagged slightly. The communication channels remained erratic, and the man in 170 grew more focused, oblivious to the quiet countermeasures unfolding before him. Emily's device hummed softly, scanning, countering, alerting her to the depth of intrusion. Her hands danced across the controls, feeding encrypted signals into the system, masking her intervention from casual detection. The first real sign of imminent danger arrived as a warning beep sounded faintly from the cockpit's console. Rourke's brow furrowed. "What is that?" he muttered under his breath, instinctively checking his controls. Stanton mirrored his concern, and the plane shuddered subtly as if responding to an unseen force. The man in 17A adjusted his earpiece, again sending signals with precision, unaware that Emily was already disrupting the sequence. Emily's pulse quickened, but her demeanor remained calm. She could feel the pressure in the cabin, not from altitude, but from the invisible digital tension mounting with each passing second. She had only moments to assess, respond, and protect. A small figure in row 9, carrying the weight of lives far beyond what anyone could imagine. The ordinary flight had begun, but the air itself was changing. Turbulence was no longer a weather phenomenon. It was a warning. As the plane continued its cruise, subtle shadows of chaos spread across its systems. Emily leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowing, fingers poised for immediate intervention. She had detected enough anomalies to know that the ordinary flight had ended the moment the autopilot began behaving erratically. The invisible battle lines had been drawn, and in row 9, the quiet girl who seemed so ordinary was already preparing to face them. By the time the passengers began sipping coffee and murmuring about weather delays, Emily had traced patterns, identified potential weaknesses, and braced herself. Captain Rourke remained unaware that a small, quiet hero sat in plain sight, silently, preparing to counter a threat that would soon erupt into a battle for the plane itself. The air had begun to change, and so had the fate of Flight 237. The routine hum of Flight 237's engines had become a deceptive lull, masking the invisible storm quietly unfolding within the aircraft systems. Captain James Rourke adjusted the yoke once more, scanning the digital readouts with growing unease. The autopilot had begun subtle, inexplicable deviations in altitude and heading, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, yet unmistakable to a veteran like him. His instincts screamed, this was no ordinary glitch. Something was taking control. Emily Carter, sitting in row 9, could feel it too. Every anomaly, every micro-tremor in the aircraft systems resonated with her trained senses. She had already identified the source, a man in seat 17A, sending subtle encrypted signals into the plane's guidance system. The faint hum of his earpiece, the rapid hand movements, the constant scanning of surrounding instruments, all indicators of a calculated intrusion. She clenched her jaw, realizing that the intrusion wasn't just a prank or error. It was an orchestrated attack. The passengers, oblivious to the digital battlefield unfolding around them, chatted quietly or read magazines, feeling the occasional turbulence as nothing more than a normal part of flying. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, offering coffee and snacks with practiced cheerfulness, unaware of the tension building in the cabin. The ordinary flight had ended. A sudden alert blinked on the cockpit's console. Rourke's eyes widened as a metallic voice, distorted and chilling, echoed through the communication system. Control override engaged. Divert course to Atlantic sector immediately. The autopilot froze completely. Rourke's hands gripped the yoke with iron determination, trying to wrest manual control from the unresponsive systems. "Liam, it's happening," he muttered, his voice low but tense. Stanton leaned forward, rapidly checking instruments. But the system's hijack was sophisticated, far beyond anything standard protocols could counter. The cabin remained unaware. Some passengers noticed the plane's subtle tilt, but dismissed it as turbulence. Others exchanged nervous glances, while a few parents tried to soothe their children. Emily, however, recognized that the situation had escalated. The hijacker's digital intrusion had reached a critical point, and if not countered immediately, the plane could be manipulated entirely. She knew what she had to do, and there was no time to hesitate. Emily stood, her small frame unassuming but purposeful, and began walking toward the cockpit. Flight attendants instinctively moved to stop her. "Hey, young lady, you can't," one began, but Emily cut them off, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a small metallic chip embedded beneath her skin. It gleamed faintly under the cabin lights, catching Rourke's attention even from the cockpit. His heart skipped. That code, engraved subtly into her arm, was one he recognized instantly. Echo 19. The girl in row 9, barely 13, had been trained for scenarios like this. She had been a secret asset, part of a classified cyber defense program few even knew existed. Her father, a cyber defense specialist, had been killed in a digital hijack mission years prior, and her training had been accelerated ever since. Rourke remembered her from a past briefing, though she had always been introduced by her code name. "It can't be," he muttered, eyes wide as she approached the cockpit door. "Captain Rourke," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You need to let me in, now." Her eyes, fierce and unwavering, locked on his. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only determination honed through years of covert training. The captain's mind raced. He had faced hijacks before, but never a digital one of this sophistication. And never had he faced a child who could potentially save everyone on board. He exhaled slowly, weighing the options. There was no time for bureaucratic hesitation. "All right," he said finally, unlocking the cockpit door. "You're in." Emily entered swiftly, placing her backpack on the console and connecting her small device to the plane's guidance system. The cockpit, usually a domain of mechanical control and electronic dominance, became a war room of nerves, skill, and intellect. The screens flickered as Emily's device interfaced with the aircraft's digital systems. Red alerts flashed, warning of intrusion attempts, blocked signals, and overriding commands from an external source. She whispered codes under her breath, line after line, counteracting the hijacker's every move. Her small fingers flew across the device, each keystroke precise, deliberate, and effective. She had trained for this, and now her preparation met reality. The hijacker, seated in 17A, realized almost immediately that his control was being contested. He glanced toward row 9, suspicion flickering across his face as he noticed the girl's deliberate actions. Panic didn't show in her movements, but her intensity was palpable. "Who is she?" he muttered under his breath, a tremor of unease entering his voice. His confidence, previously unshakable, began to waver. Rourke, watching Emily work, felt a mixture of disbelief and relief. "She's just a kid," he murmured to himself, shaking his head in amazement. And yet, the truth was undeniable. She was not just a kid. She was Echo 19, a prodigy capable of digital feats he had only witnessed in simulations and intelligence briefings. The plane and everyone aboard depended on her now. Suddenly, The metallic voice returned through the communication system, more aggressive, more insistent. Echo 19, you shouldn't have come back. Cease interference immediately, or this aircraft will be neutralized. Emily froze for a moment, recognition dawning. That voice, it was the same man responsible for her father's death. Her jaw tightened, her eyes burning with resolve. She whispered under her breath, "Not this time." Her fingers danced faster, countering every line of attack, isolating the intrusion, and stabilizing the autopilot just enough to give Rourke partial control. The plane's tilt leveled slightly, giving passengers the illusion that turbulence had merely subsided. In reality, the cabin remained a tension-filled crucible. Emily's calm under pressure was the only thing preventing disaster. Sweat formed on her brow, but her movements never faltered. The hijackers' attempts were sophisticated, but predictable to someone trained in pattern recognition and encryption manipulation. Minutes stretched like hours as Emily continued her digital battle. Every keystroke mattered. Every fraction of a second could decide the fate of Flight 237. The cockpit became a symphony of screens, alerts, and whispered calculations. Rourke occasionally glanced at her, awestruck. "I can't believe this," he murmured. "A child, controlling the fate of a plane." Finally, Emily leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screens. She had gained partial control, enough to prevent the hijacker from fully overriding the systems. But she knew the threat was far from neutralized. This was only the beginning, the calm before the storm. The hijacker would escalate, and Flight 237 would soon enter a phase where digital manipulation would collide with raw human skill. As she glanced toward the cabin, Emily noticed the passengers, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Her resolve hardened. She couldn't fail. Not now, not ever. The ordinary flight had vanished. In its place was a battlefield of the skies, with her as the unexpected defender. A child whose courage and intellect would determine whether Flight 237 would reach its destination safely or become a tragedy. Emily stepped fully into the cockpit, the door closing with a soft thud behind her, isolating the trio from the oblivious passengers. The hum of the engines, once a background comfort, now seemed loud, each vibration carrying the weight of imminent crisis. Captain James Rourke leaned forward, studying her face, pale but resolute, trying to reconcile the image of a 13-year-old girl with the prodigious skill now evident before him. "You're Echo 19, he whispered, the words barely audible over the cockpit's machinery. Emily nodded slightly, her eyes still scanning the screens, analyzing every digital anomaly. "Yes, sir. That's my code name. I was part of a classified DARPA program, trained in cyber defense protocols and digital countermeasures," she said, her voice calm yet authoritative. She placed her backpack on the console, connecting it to the plane's systems. A low hum resonated as her custom device interfaced with the aircraft, quietly overriding the hijacker's signals. Rourke exhaled, a mix of disbelief and recognition washing over him. He remembered a briefing years ago, a secure, off-the-record session about young cyber prodigies, individuals trained for missions too delicate for most adults. Emily had been mentioned only by her code name, a brilliant mind capable of handling situations far beyond the comprehension of ordinary humans. And now, here she was, in row 9 no longer, but the pivotal defense of Flight 237. Emily's gaze shifted briefly toward the rear of the plane, where Seat 17A held the man responsible for initiating the hijack. He had grown more agitated, his subtle attempts to manipulate the aircraft being countered invisibly by Emily's device. She spoke quietly to Rourke, her voice almost a whisper, yet carrying absolute certainty. "They're targeting this plane, not for ransom, but because of the passengers. high-value individuals, retired generals on board. This isn't just about Flight 237. It's a strategic operation. The captain's mind raced. The gravity of the situation deepened. He had faced hijacks before, but never one orchestrated with digital precision and lethal intent, nor one intersecting so directly with national security. "Then you're saying—" he began, but Emily's swift, precise gestures on her device cut him off. She didn't need to explain further. Every screen in the cockpit flashed red alerts momentarily, then stabilized under her control. Emily's fingers flew over her small device, typing complex sequences that neutralized attempts from the hijacker to override the autopilot. The digital battle was invisible to the passengers, but every second was critical. Her heart pounded as she detected multiple intrusion points, some subtle, some aggressive, all requiring immediate countermeasures. She whispered lines of encrypted code, recalling phrases she had memorized from her father's manuals. Those lessons, long stored in memory, now became a lifeline for the hundreds of lives aboard. Rourke watched, both awed and tense. The cockpit, usually a domain of calm procedural control, had become a war room of intellect and precision. "You're incredible," he said softly. "I've never seen anyone do this, especially not someone your age." Emily didn't respond, her focus unwavering. Age was irrelevant here. Skill, training, and courage mattered, and she had all three in abundance. Suddenly, a flicker on the display indicated a failed countermeasure. The hijacker had launched a second, more sophisticated intrusion. Emily's eyes narrowed, recognition dawning. "It's him, the one who killed my father," she muttered under her breath. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't falter. The personal stakes now intertwined with the professional. She wasn't just defending a plane. She was confronting the very man responsible for her family's tragedy. Rourke's brow furrowed. "You can stop him?" he asked, voice low but urgent. Emily's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I can, but it's going to require complete focus. We can't make mistakes, and I need you to trust me completely." The captain nodded without hesitation. Trust was the only tool he had left. They had to act as a single unit, human and prodigy, intertwined in a delicate ballet against a digital adversary. Emily activated a secondary interface on her device, isolating the hijacker's signals from the plane's systems. Every keystroke was precise, countering the intrusions almost before they were executed. Red alerts flickered, then vanished, as the autopilot stabilized under her control. The hijacker's attempts grew increasingly frantic, his frustration evident in the tightening grip on his earpiece and the rapid movements of his fingers. He hadn't anticipated an opponent like this, especially not a child seated in row 9. Rourke guided the plane manually, maintaining altitude and heading, while Emily neutralized digital threats. The cockpit became a synchronized dance of physical skill and cyber intellect. She issued quiet instructions, sometimes asking for minor adjustments in altitude or speed, each timed perfectly to counter the unseen attacks. The passengers remained unaware, their sense of calm a fragile illusion maintained by Emily's precise interventions. Minutes stretched into tension-laden hours in the cockpit, each one a microcosm of danger and determination. Emily's mind raced through contingencies, anticipating the hijacker's next move while simultaneously countering current threats. The digital and physical challenges intertwined, requiring her to calculate, predict, and act with perfect timing. Rourke observed, occasionally offering adjustments, but ultimately trusting her skill above all. Then came a breakthrough. Emily discovered the hijacker's primary control node, the central point through which all manipulations flowed. With a precise sequence of commands, she isolated it, effectively cutting off the hijacker's direct access to the aircraft. The red alerts on the cockpit screens shifted to green, a faint sign that the immediate threat had been contained. A small, Almost imperceptible exhale escaped Rourke's lips. For the first time in hours, a glimmer of hope emerged. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. The hijacker was still present, still plotting, and still capable of escalation. The challenge now shifted from mere counteraction to strategy, to ensure that he could not regain control, and that the plane could continue safely to its destination. Her training, her memory of her father's teachings, and her sheer courage were the only tools at their disposal. "Captain," Emily said softly, her eyes scanning the final sequences on her device. "I've stabilized the plane for now, but he's not gone. We need to anticipate his next move. He's experienced, and desperate men become dangerous." Rourke nodded solemnly, recognizing the weight of her words. The fight was far from over. In that cockpit, between the metallic hum of the engines and the quiet tension of imminent danger, the ordinary flight had fully transformed into an extraordinary battle of skill, courage, and intellect. Emily, the girl from row 9, no longer just a passenger, had revealed her true identity. She was Echo 19, a prodigy, a defender, and now the pivotal force keeping Flight 237 from disaster. The air around them seemed charged, the hum of machinery and the rhythm of the engines forming a backdrop for a silent struggle that would define the lives of everyone aboard. In that moment, age, size, and appearance were irrelevant. What mattered was courage, skill, and determination, and Emily had them all. The cabin of Flight 237 hummed with an almost deceptive calm. Passengers sipped their coffee, adjusted their seats, or stared out at the vast expanse of clouds, completely unaware that they were sitting atop a battlefield far above the earth. The autopilot, previously under threat, now hovered in a delicate balance thanks to Emily's intervention. But the fight was far from over. Beyond the walls of the fuselage, a digital storm raged, a battle of intellects, speed and nerves, invisible to all but a few. Emily's fingers danced across her small device, her eyes scanning multiple readouts simultaneously. The hijacker's signals were persistent, unpredictable, and lethal in design. Each line of code he injected was an attempt to destabilize the autopilot, misdirect the aircraft, or override Rourke's manual inputs. The metallic voice that had threatened the plane earlier now came again through subtle digital channels, a ghostly echo of malice. Echo 19. "You shouldn't have returned. This ends now." Emily's jaw tightened. Recognition flared, the same man who had killed her father years ago. The personal stakes now intertwined directly with the professional. Her heart beat faster, but her hands remained steady, every keystroke precise. She had trained for scenarios like this in simulations countless times, but the weight of reality was far heavier than any virtual exercise. Lives hung in balance, the plane itself a fragile vessel, and her opponent's intent deadly and absolute. Captain Rourke adjusted the yoke, maintaining the plane's altitude as minor turbulence shook the cabin. He glanced at Emily, whose calm focus contrasted sharply with the rising tension outside the cockpit. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly, voice low, aware of the gravity, but unwilling to alarm the passengers. Emily didn't look up. "He's aggressive and desperate. Each of his moves is a countermeasure designed to anticipate my reaction. But I can isolate him, block most of his commands, and I can stabilize the autopilot for the moment. This is going to escalate soon, though. He knows I'm here, and he'll adapt." Outside, the man in seat 17A grew visibly agitated. His subtle attempts to manipulate the flight systems became more frantic, more desperate. He was used to control, used to fear, used to being the unseen hand guiding events. Now, a 13-year-old girl was challenging him, neutralizing every command, predicting his strategies before he could fully execute them. Panic flickered in his eyes, though he masked it with practiced composure. The plane shuddered slightly as a minor turbulence wave passed. But the real instability came from the cockpit, from the invisible battle raging in the aircraft systems. Red alerts flashed briefly across Emily's screens, each one indicating a successful intrusion attempt by the hijacker. With rapid, precise keystrokes, she countered each line, isolating malicious scripts and restoring stability. Rourke held the plane steady manually, adjusting for minor fluctuations while monitoring the instruments. He had flown in combat zones, faced emergencies, and survived crises before, but nothing compared to this. A child was holding their lives in her hands, while he assisted physically with guidance, trusting her judgment completely. It was a strange mix of awe, disbelief, and absolute reliance. Minutes stretched into tension-laden moments. Emily's mind raced through potential contingencies. The hijacker's aggression indicated one thing: he wasn't going to retreat. He was likely planning a final override, an attempt to seize complete control. She needed to anticipate his next move, prepare countermeasures, and ensure that Rourke had enough control to respond manually if systems failed entirely. Suddenly, the first real escalation occurred. One of the autopilot modules flickered, an unauthorized command attempting to divert the aircraft sharply to the right. Emily's device identified it instantly, countering the intrusion and restoring balance. Red alerts blinked wildly, but her confidence never wavered. Her fingers flew across her device, typing a complex sequence to neutralize the hijacker's advanced maneuvers. Rourke noticed the slight tremor in the plane as it tilted briefly, then corrected. "You're doing something I've never seen before," he muttered under his breath. Emily's hands didn't pause. "I'm holding it, but he's adapting. He'll try a new approach any second." Her voice remained calm, but inside, adrenaline surged, sharpening every sense. The cabin trembled again, a minor turbulence wave amplified by the hijacker's digital interference. Passengers murmured uneasily. Flight attendants clutched service carts, trying to maintain composure. To them, it was weather. To Emily and Rourke, it was a direct manifestation of the battle raging in the plane's hidden systems. Then the hijacker escalated further. His attempts became more erratic, aggressive, and unpredictable. He initiated multiple overlapping sequences, simultaneous attacks on the autopilot, navigation systems, and communication arrays. Emily's eyes narrowed. This was the last-ditch phase, the kind of move that could overwhelm even the best-trained defenses. But she had anticipated such a scenario. Her device's adaptive algorithms kicked in, automatically countering redundant attacks, blocking malicious pathways, and isolating the hijacker's signals. For a moment, the cockpit was deathly silent, except for the hum of electronics and the low rumble of engines. Emily's hands flew over her device, a symphony of keystrokes and coded maneuvers. The hijacker's attacks grew more frantic, and she recognized the unmistakable rhythm of desperation. He was realizing his control was slipping. Captain Rourke adjusted the yoke again, manually compensating for subtle changes in the plane's heading. "I've got partial control," he said. "Keep stabilizing the systems. I'll handle the plane physically." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning multiple readouts at once. Her mind functioned on several levels simultaneously, predicting intrusion patterns, countering commands, and monitoring the physical stability of the aircraft. Minutes passed like an eternity. The hijacker's frustration became evident as his digital assaults intensified. Emily identified a critical vulnerability, the main node of his intrusion. With precise timing, she executed a series of countermeasures that effectively cut off his primary access point. The red alerts shifted to yellow, then finally green. The autopilot stabilized. The plane leveled perfectly, giving Rourke enough control to maneuver safely. But Emily knew it wasn't over. The hijacker's secondary systems remained active, and he could still attempt a resurgence. Her eyes flicked to the cabin, the passengers oblivious to the life and death struggle above their heads. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. One misstep, one delayed response, and hundreds of lives could be lost. Rourke glanced at her again, admiration in his eyes. "You're extraordinary," he said softly. Emily didn't look up. She was already anticipating the next move, calculating probabilities and preparing contingencies. Courage, intellect, and focus were her weapons. Age didn't matter here. Skill did, and she had it in abundance. The plane hummed steadily now, a fragile calm restored by Emily's interventions. But the storm was not over. The hijacker would adapt. He would escalate again. The battle for Flight 237's safety was ongoing, and Emily knew the Sky War had only just begun. The cabin of Flight 237 had never felt heavier. The artificial hum of the engines now carried an ominous undertone, vibrating through every seat, every panel, and every passenger. For Emily Carter, seated in what had once been row 9, this was no longer a mere flight. It had become a crucible of tension, a battlefield between intellect, courage, and raw danger. Every breath she took counted. Every keystroke mattered. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. Minutes ago, she had successfully isolated the hijacker's primary intrusion node, stabilizing the autopilot enough to prevent catastrophic deviation. But she knew this was only temporary. The man in seat 17A, desperate and cornered, had initiated his most dangerous contingency, a fail-safe designed to exploit the aircraft's secondary systems. Emily's device alerted her instantly, a cascade of commands aimed at disabling navigation, communication, and the oxygen regulators. Captain Rourke's brow furrowed as alarms began blinking faintly on the cockpit panels. The autopilot was stable, but minor systems trembled under pressure. Emily leaned forward, eyes narrowed, analyzing the attack in real time. "He's triggered the failsafe," she muttered, voice taut with focus. "Oxygen masks will deploy, and if I don't sever the link now, it could incapacitate everyone." Outside the cockpit, turbulence began again, stronger than before, as if the plane itself sensed the internal struggle. Passengers murmured nervously, unaware of the invisible digital war taking place above their heads. Flight attendants clutched carts and braces, their faces masks of calm masking growing concern. Most remained unaware that lives, hundreds of them, rested in the hands of a child whose appearance betrayed none of her lethal precision. Emily exhaled slowly, centering herself. She knew what had to be done. The hijacker's fail-safe was sophisticated, requiring a total system purge to sever the link, a step that would temporarily render the cockpit blind, disabling critical systems entirely. If the plane faltered during this period, even for seconds, catastrophe could ensue. But she had no choice. Hesitation would allow him to regain control. "Captain," Emily said quietly, her hand steady on the device, "I need to fry the cockpit's main system temporarily. It's the only way to stop him completely." Rourke's eyes widened. You mean we'll have no instruments?" he asked, tension in his voice. Emily nodded, calm but resolute. "Yes, but I'll guide you through manually while the override disconnects him. Trust me." Rourke swallowed hard, weighing the risk. He had flown blind before, in combat zones, in turbulence, in moments of mechanical failure, but never under these circumstances. A child was instructing him to trust her judgment as she intentionally disabled the systems that allowed him to control the plane. And yet, the clarity of her focus, the confidence in her tone, left no room for doubt. "Do it," he said firmly. "I'll fly blind." Emily's fingers moved with lightning speed, initiating the system purge. Warning lights flared, and the screens in the cockpit went dark. The autopilot disengaged entirely. The plane's instruments became silent. The engine hum felt sharper, louder, echoing through the fuselage with every vibration. Outside, turbulence intensified, clouds forming a roiling, ominous ceiling as Flight 237 became a delicate glider in invisible battle. She instructed Rourke calmly, her voice cutting through the tension. Reduce speed slightly. Keep altitude steady. The first turn is coming. 3 degrees starboard now. Adjust carefully. Perfect. Hold steady. Rourke's hands were steady but tense, eyes focused on the horizon through the cockpit's windows. He relied entirely on her guidance, each command a lifeline through a storm of uncertainty. In the cabin, passengers remained mostly unaware. Some noticed the flickering lights, the faint tremor of the plane, or the occasional shift in altitude. Others murmured nervously or clutched seats, interpreting the chaos as nothing more than turbulence. None could know the quiet hero at row 9, now at the cockpit, was orchestrating a counterattack against a digital enemy intent on total destruction. Emily's device hummed, analyzing hundreds of thousands of lines of code in real time. The hijacker's final sequence was intricate, layered, and almost elegant in its design, a digital symphony with deadly intent. She isolated each strand, countering line by line, while simultaneously guiding Rourke through the blind maneuvering of a massive aircraft without instruments. Her training, her father's teachings, and years of memory exercises converged into a single moment of precision execution. The first oxygen masks dropped abruptly. A hiss of compressed air startled passengers, panic flickering briefly in the cabin. Children screamed. Adults clutched seats. Flight attendants shouted instructions over the roar. Emily's device confirmed that this was part of the hijacker's secondary failsafe, a method to incapacitate everyone by manipulating environmental controls. But she had anticipated this. Within seconds, the system was neutralized, restoring controlled cabin pressure while the hijacker's sequence began to unravel. The man in 17A froze, realization dawning on his face. His carefully orchestrated failsafe had been foiled. Emily's intervention had severed his control, cutting the wires of his intricate plan before they could strangle the plane. Panic flashed across his features. He had underestimated her. He hadn't accounted for a prodigy who could act decisively under unimaginable pressure. Emily exhaled slowly, though her mind remained hyper-focused. She continued neutralizing residual code, ensuring no hidden sequences remained active. Each keystroke brought her closer to full control and permanent stabilization of Flight 237. Red alerts began fading, replaced by subtle green indicators of restored system integrity. The autopilot would be offline temporarily, but Rourke was now the sole manual guide, with Emily acting as his unseen navigator through the storm. Rourke adjusted the yoke again, keeping the aircraft level through pockets of turbulence. Sweat ran down his temple, but his confidence grew as Emily's instructions guided him with unerring precision. Okay, steady. Just a few more adjustments. Perfect. Hold that heading, she whispered. The cabin quivered slightly, then stabilized. For a fleeting moment, calm returned, fragile but real. Emily glanced back toward the cabin, taking in the passengers, their fear slowly giving way to oblivious calm, as the worst of the failsafe's effects had been nullified. Her heart pounded, but she felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Lives had been preserved. Hundreds of people, from business travelers to children, remained unharmed, because a small girl had refused to hesitate. The man in seat 17 slumped slightly, defeated, aware that his plan had been foiled. His control lost, his aggression quelled. He realized he had been bested by someone he had never expected, a 13-year-old child, fearless, brilliant, and unyielding. Emily's gaze met his, icy and unwavering. She had not only saved the plane, she had confronted a personal demon, the man responsible for her father's death, and emerged victorious in this round. With the digital threat neutralized, the cockpit settled into tense normalcy. Rourke guided the plane smoothly, the hum of engines now a comforting companion rather than a harbinger of disaster. Emily exhaled, her fingers resting briefly on her device. She had acted decisively, sacrificed temporary control, and severed the hijackers' link, buying them all a lifeline, a chance to survive and reach safety. But Emily knew the journey was not yet over. Flight 237 was stabilized, but high above, in the vast expanse of sky, danger could always re-emerge. Her vigilance could not cease, and Rourke would remain dependent on her guidance for the moments to come. Still, a crucial battle had been won. The breaking point had passed, and the immediate threat had been vanquished through courage, intellect, and sheer determination. The horizon stretched endlessly through the cockpit's windshield, a vast expanse of clouds glowing faintly in the late afternoon sun. Flight 237, now stable thanks to Emily's interventions, began its slow, deliberate descent toward the nearest safe airport. The autopilot remained offline, forcing Captain James Rourke to manually guide the massive aircraft through a delicate ballet of altitude adjustments, turbulence corrections, and navigation calculations. Every movement required precision, every second a test of skill and nerve. Emily, seated slightly behind him, but still within reach of the cockpit controls, monitored multiple systems simultaneously. The hijackers' link had been severed, but residual digital threats remained, small, fragmented sequences designed to interfere with communications, navigation, and cabin systems. She neutralized each one in real time, her eyes flicking from screen to device to horizon without pause. Her mind worked faster than most adults could even comprehend, weaving together logic, intuition, and years of covert training. The passengers, still largely unaware of the storm they had survived, murmured quietly among themselves. Some noticed turbulence pockets or the slight hum of the engines working harder than normal. Flight attendants reassured nervous travelers, moving with calm efficiency that masked the truth. They had flown through near disaster, guided invisibly, by a prodigy whose courage had saved every life on board. Rourke's hands gripped the yoke with focus, muscles taut, adjusting the aircraft's heading and descent rate. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice taut but calm, "we need to start lining up for the approach. Are the systems stable enough for me to rely fully on manual control?" Emily's eyes scanned her readouts one last time. "Yes, Captain. The digital threats are neutralized, and the plane systems are stabilized. I'll monitor, but you have full authority on the yoke now. Keep your focus on the approach. I'll guide and intercept any minor anomalies." A subtle shiver ran through the fuselage as the plane entered a denser cloud bank. Visibility dropped briefly, the hum of engines louder, the sensation of altitude more pronounced. Rourke's experience in extreme weather and emergency situations became critical. He adjusted speed and tilt, feeling the plane's response to subtle air currents in turbulence pockets. Emily provided quiet, precise instructions, her voice the calm thread threading through the chaos. The man in seat 17A remained slumped in his seat, defeated but not entirely silent. His presence was a reminder that the threat wasn't only digital, there was human danger as well. Emily's eyes flicked toward him, her body tense but controlled. She had neutralized his control over the plane, but he remained a potential threat if allowed to act. For now, she decided to focus on the descent. Neutralizing him fully could come once the aircraft was safely on the ground. The cockpit was a study in contrast. Rourke, muscles coiled and eyes fixed on instruments and horizon, guiding a massive aircraft manually. Emily, calm, precise, neutralizing residual digital threats, anticipating problems before they could manifest. The synergy between them was silent but profound. Lives depended entirely on this delicate partnership, a harmony of instinct, intellect, and courage. As Flight 237 descended further, Emily noticed minor anomalies, slight deviations in cabin pressure readings, small, seemingly random alerts. She recognized them immediately as residual effects from the hijacker's earlier attacks. One by one, she corrected them, rerouting circuits, isolating compromised modules, and confirming system integrity. Her efficiency was staggering. Every keystroke mattered, every command a lifeline. Rourke's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. Approaching altitude for final descent. Emily, give me headings for landing. Any turbulence vectors I should anticipate? Emily's eyes never left the multiple readouts. Minor crosswind, approaching 5 degrees to the right. Compensate by 2 degrees port. Speed steady at 250 knots until glide path is confirmed. Cabin pressure stable. No further oxygen adjustments needed. The plane shuddered slightly as the crosswind hit, but Rourke's hands moved with precision, the aircraft responding beautifully. Emily's voice guided him like a calm, invisible co-pilot. The passengers, meanwhile, remained unaware that their lives depended on a combination of skill, courage, and sheer intellect displayed in that cockpit. Minutes stretched, each one tense and deliberate. The runway approached visually through breaks in the clouds. Emily's device monitored navigation arrays, confirming that the aircraft remained aligned with the correct approach vector, while simultaneously ensuring that no residual hijacker code could interfere. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with focus, the weight of responsibility pushing her to perfect every calculation, anticipate every adjustment, and maintain full control over the unseen digital battlefield. Rourke adjusted the throttle and yoke, preparing for the critical phase of descent. Emily's voice was calm, precise, and unwavering. Align with glide path to 3 degrees port. Reduce speed gradually. Prepare for final flare at 50 feet above ground. The turbulence intensified slightly, clouds whirling around the plane as if protesting their approach. The hum of engines rose, the plane tilted subtly, and the landing gear indicators flickered. Emily's device immediately detected a minor interference in the landing gear sensors, a residual effect from the hijacker's prior manipulations. Within seconds, she rerouted the sensor feedback, confirming a safe deployment. The passengers felt a subtle dip, their stomachs lurching slightly as the plane approached the runway. A collective murmur ran through the cabin, some gripping armrests, others holding children close. Flight attendants moved quietly, ensuring everyone remained seated and buckled. They had no idea that the danger they sensed was the echo of what had nearly been disaster, and that it had been prevented by a girl who had once been a mere passenger in row 9. Rourke's hands guided the plane along the glide path, wings leveled against minor crosswinds, descent rate precise. Emily monitored every second, every system, every potential threat. She whispered instructions calmly, but with authority. Steady. Maintain heading. Reduce vertical speed gradually. Flare at 50 feet. Correct minor right roll. The runway lights grew larger, cutting through the cloud cover. Rourke followed Emily's guidance, adjusting throttle, yoke, and rudder. The landing. Gear touched smoothly, tires kissing the asphalt with minimal jolt. The plane's speed decreased, brakes deployed, and Flight 237 rolled steadily along the tarmac. A final vibration, a collective sigh of relief from the crew, and the aircraft came to a full stop. Emily leaned back slightly, exhausted but composed. The plane was safe. Lives had been preserved. And though the hijacker remained on board physically, his control had been completely neutralized. Captain Rourke exhaled slowly, removing his hands from the yoke. I can't even begin. "To tell you how incredible that was," he said quietly, glancing at Emily. She allowed herself a faint smile. Though her eyes remained alert, the sky could always hold surprises. But for now, Flight 237 had landed safely, thanks to her unparalleled skill, courage, and focus. Flight 237 had touched down safely, its massive frame rolling steadily along the runway as brakes hissed and tires squealed against the asphalt. The airport's ground crew looked up, expecting a routine arrival, unaware that the aircraft had just survived a near-catastrophic crisis, orchestrated in silence at 30,000 feet. Inside the cabin, the passengers remained mostly unaware, the ordinary post-flight murmurs resuming, though some exchanged tentative glances, noting a subtle tension lingering in the air. Captain Rourke exhaled deeply, allowing himself the first full moment of relief since takeoff. The plane was safe. Every life aboard had been preserved. And yet, a storm of questions swirled in his mind. He glanced at Emily, who remained seated, her hands resting lightly on her device. Her small frame, previously unassuming, now carried an aura of unshakable competence and calm authority. Rourke couldn't help but marvel. She had guided him, saved the plane, and neutralized a digital threat that could have ended in disaster. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice steady but full of awe. You saved this plane. Everyone on board owes you their lives." She looked up briefly, eyes meeting his. Calm, composed, yet tinged with exhaustion, she nodded. "I just did what needed to be done, sir," she replied softly. "We all have roles. Mine was this." Meanwhile, the hijacker, still seated in 17A, was escorted quietly by airport security personnel. He had been subdued physically, though the true measure of his defeat had already occurred. His control over Flight 237 had been obliterated. Emily's interventions had not only neutralized the immediate threat, but had dismantled his sophisticated digital manipulations, leaving him powerless. The man's expression flickered between disbelief and fear. He had been bested by someone he had underestimated, a 13-year-old child. In the cabin, passengers began to stir, a faint awareness of the extraordinary circumstances filtering through. Some noticed the pilot's tense expressions, the unusual stillness of the cockpit as they disembarked. Flight attendants moved efficiently, but the atmosphere carried an intangible weight. Questions formed, speculation rose, and murmurs of relief threaded through the air. Emily remained calm, though internally, a mix of exhaustion and lingering adrenaline washed over her. Her mind replayed the events of the flight, the initial digital intrusion, the hijacker's escalating tactics, the critical failsafe, and the tense descent guided manually. Every decision, every keystroke, every command had mattered, and the outcome had depended on her focus and courage. Captain Rourke finally turned to face the passengers. Standing from his seat, his uniform impeccable, but slightly disheveled from hours of tense flight, he addressed the cabin in a calm, deliberate voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a moment to commend someone very special aboard Flight 237. We faced an unprecedented situation today, a sophisticated digital hijack. Thanks to the courage, skill, and presence of a young hero among us, every single one of you is safe. This young lady," he gestured toward Emily, "played a pivotal role in ensuring our safe landing. Please join me in thanking Echo 19, our guardian angel in row 9. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Heads turned, eyes widened. Murmurs erupted into astonished applause. Passengers, previously oblivious to the danger, began to understand the extraordinary heroism that had unfolded silently above their heads. Children clutched their parents' hands. Adults leaned forward in awe, and some passengers rose to their feet, applauding the young prodigy who had saved them all. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly, though her composure remained intact. She had never sought recognition. Her training and upbringing had emphasized action, not accolades. Yet, in this moment, she allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement of the gratitude surrounding her. The applause resonated in her chest, not as validation, but as a reflection of the lives she had preserved. Airport security personnel escorted the hijacker from the plane, his hands restrained, his expression pale. Reporters and news crews outside began to gather, alerted by preliminary communications from air traffic control. The incident, initially described as a routine landing, was quickly transformed into a story of courage, crisis, and unlikely heroism. Emily's identity, initially classified as Echo 19, was now poised to become public knowledge. Captain Rourke approached her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've changed my understanding of what courage and skill mean. Emily, I've flown many years, seen many emergencies, but never have I encountered someone like you. The world needs to know what you've done." Emily shook her head slightly. "I don't do this for recognition, sir. I do it because it's necessary. That's all." Her voice was calm, humble, but her eyes reflected a deep, unshakable resolve. She had become a hero, but in her mind, she was simply performing the role she had been trained for. As passengers disembarked, many sought to shake her hand, offer thanks, or simply express their amazement. Each encounter was met with quiet dignity. Some asked questions. How did you do it? Were you scared? How could someone so young? Emily responded with calm clarity, each answer a testament to her intelligence, composure, and training. The story of Flight 237 would be remembered not for its danger, but for the extraordinary courage of a young girl who turned a potentially catastrophic hijack into a triumph of skill and bravery. Outside, the media frenzy grew. Reporters clamored for interviews, cameras flashed, and headlines were drafted within minutes. Row 9 hero, teenager stops mid-air hijack. Echo 19 saves Flight 237. A child's bravery above the clouds. Emily remained calm, allowing Captain Rourke and authorities to provide official statements while she quietly observed the reactions around her. The world now knew the truth. Courage could come in the most unexpected forms, and heroism was not bound by age or appearance. Later, as Flight 237 was secured and passengers collected their belongings, Emily reflected quietly. The digital battle, the physical tension, the near disaster, all were behind her now. Yet the lessons endured. Focus under pressure, courage in the face of danger, and the quiet power of skill and preparation. She had honored her father's memory, saved hundreds of lives, and demonstrated that true heroism could exist in the unlikeliest of forms. Captain Rourke approached her one final time before leaving the aircraft. "Emily, I hope you understand how extraordinary you are. The world may never fully realize what just happened up there, but I do. And everyone who is on board owes you more than they could ever repay." She smiled faintly, her composure intact, yet inside, she felt the deep satisfaction of a mission completed. "Thank you, sir. I just did what had to be done." The hijacker, now in custody, would face justice. Flight 237, once a vessel of potential tragedy, had become a testament to courage, intelligence, and the extraordinary capacity of a young girl to face danger without hesitation. And as the passengers dispersed, many unaware of the full extent of what had occurred, one truth remained clear. Above the clouds, in a cockpit divided between instinct and intellect, heroism had taken flight, embodied in the remarkable figure of Echo 19, the girl who had turned an ordinary seat in Row 9 into a position of unparalleled bravery. As the sun set over the airport, casting golden light across the tarmac, Emily quietly stepped from the aircraft. Her mission had ended. Lives had been saved. A hero's story had been written, one that would inspire countless others for years to come. And though she would always remain humble, the world would remember the girl from row 9 who had faced fear, fought with intellect and courage, and emerged victorious.